Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. I'm your host, Alan Miller, and with us today is a guest who hasn't been around for a long time, but he is a prior guest, Mark Heaney, an attorney of note, a well-known consumer rights attorney, and we'll talk about a lot of things today involving consumers and organizations that are trying to shaft consumers. And Mark has also been as well as admitted here and admitted in the state of Arizona and several other states and a lot of courts, Federal Bar Association and other bar associations. He has been a radio host of AM 950, among others, and we know each other for a while, and it's a pleasure to have you back.
Thanks, Alan. I always enjoy doing your show, and it's always good to see you.
I don't know how many years it is since you started here. We're entering our 15th year now. We've done over 1,500 of these.
1,500. I think I was here a few years, a couple of years ago, or maybe it's been 3 years.
I would
now.
say 2, 3. Yeah. So there are a bunch of vultures out there that are preying on consumers, and they take several forms. They take the forms of payday lenders. They take the forms of debt collectors. And you are the bulwark that stands between the consumer and them. So talk about it.
Well, we try to be. I try to be, and then, as you said, there's no shortage of these vultures that are out there that really are taking advantage of consumers and individuals that are facing a difficult time. But these consumer rights violations can happen to anyone, the rich, the poor. It just happens to be that the poor and working class are more susceptible to a lot of the scams that occur, particularly in the credit market, where someone who's desperate for cash, needing income to get by, maybe to the next paycheck or whatnot, doesn't have a lot of options, doesn't have a lot of choices. Can easily be preyed on when it comes to loans that they need to obtain, and it can take the form of, as you said, in payday lenders, which is kind of a broad term for short-term consumer loans. They may be $250, they may be $500, and they're usually for 14 days or 30 days.
Until you get your paycheck.
Yeah, exactly. That's a typical form. It used to be that they'd give you the money, and when you got your paycheck, you handed over your paycheck to them.
Except the interest has become prohibitive on those.
Oh, the interest, when you look at an annual percentage rate, as I've had some cases come to me and I've sued them out, and we've gone to arbitration, a number of them, for violating Minnesota's laws regarding consumer loans, I've seen annual percentage rates of 1,250%. 1,250%.
Which is a pretty good deal if you're the one loaning the money.
It is. In past societies and over history, they would have the death penalty for such for lending.
That's really usurious loans.
Yeah, they are usurious loans. They are taking advantage of the most vulnerable citizens who don't have options. Often they're people that just don't have established credit, or they don't have a relationship with a lending institution. They don't have family that they can borrow $200 to get their car fixed so they can get to work. So they're desperation, and fortunately, Minnesota has pretty good laws when it comes to small small consumer loans or payday lending loans.
And a really good attorney general
Yes.
who really enforces them.
Lori Swanson has been wonderful. She recently had an action against a company named Sure Advance that was publicized, and she ended up getting back about $500,000 to $600,000 that ultimately went back to repay Minnesotans that had those loans, repay the interest that they had paid during that period, and some damages. So she's done a wonderful job, and the legislature on this particular issue has been pretty good.
And the sad thing is that these are people that are really needy. They're really in trouble. They need the money right away. Makes them susceptible to being preyed upon.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what, and you'll see along the road in some of the poor neighborhoods, payday lenders or pawn shops and the rest of these organizations. What's more insidious, I think, and troublesome is the fact that now these payday lenders are in everyone's home through the internet. They're right there in your living room. If someone needs that money, they get right on there. Now, our payday lending statute in Minnesota covers those lenders. If it doesn't matter where you are, if you're going to lend to Minnesotans through the internet, you need to be licensed by our Department of Commerce.
I was just going to say that. It's doing business in Minnesota, and even if you are in Alabama, you are doing business in Minnesota, which gives Minnesota jurisdiction. And as Lori Swanson has gone after some of these out-of-state vultures.
And I've gone after a number of them too. I mean, and so our statute's very strong. They've tried to hide behind different arguments, but the fact of the matter is, and there's some pretty good court decisions, or very good court decisions on it, saying the statute says, and it's upheld, that if you are going to lend in Minnesota, you need to be licensed by our department. You need to follow our statutes. And a lot of the internet payday lenders are not following the law, and they aren't licensed by the Department of Commerce. I mean, I wouldn't encourage anyone to take out one of these loans, but if someone feels that they just have to and they can't do anything else, be sure to go to the Minnesota Department of Commerce's website, look under the tools for licenses, and see if your payday lender is licensed. Chances are they aren't. Or if you have gotten a payday loan, and this is really important, if any of your listeners or people out there have gotten payday loans, short-term loans over the internet, chances are that that lender violated Minnesota law, and the remedies under our law are wonderful. First of all, you don't have to pay back the principal on that loan. That's one of the remedies. If they violated our law, you don't have to pay back the loan. You get reimbursed all the interest that you've paid, which can end up being thousands of dollars if you've had that loan over time. You don't have to pay back that loan. There's up to $1,000 statutory damages, $1,000 just by the fact that they have violated the statute. And you can have an attorney like myself represent you, and the defendant, the internet payday lender, has to pay the attorney's fees and costs.
Now that's a very important thing.
Absolutely.
Because you have become known as one of the principal consumer rights attorneys in the state. And the fact of the matter is that you don't get money up front. No. You take these cases on contingency.
Yeah.
And you only recover or get your fee when they recover.
Yeah, we do contingency fee work, meaning we don't take money from our consumers. Listen, my clients are often are working people, and paying attorney's fees or paying my fees is just not in the cards. And so many consumer protection statutes, all of them, I think, that are really strong, say that the defendant, when a company has violated one of these consumer protection laws, whether it's the Payday Lending Law, whether it's the Consumer Fraud Act, whether it's the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, when they violated it, they have to pay the attorney's fees of the consumer, because we want to encourage consumers to bring these actions.
And we want to encourage consumers to know their rights.
Absolutely, absolutely. We want to educate them. We want to have attorneys out doing this work. And we don't want someone to be discouraged because they were scammed out of $500, not to bring a case, because attorney is going to cost $5,000 or $10,000, to litigate an entire case. We want them to bring that case, even if it's $500, because hey, $500 to someone that's struggling is everything. $100.
It could be a month's rent.
Yeah, it's a really big deal, and we should.
And frequently, that's what these payday loans are for.
Yeah, I've
They're
seen
going to
them.
turn off the electricity or the telephone or something like that.
Yeah, typically they're loans under $1,000. Anywhere, from $150 up to $1,000 is typically the loans. And there's just been an enormous explosion of these. And between Lori Swanson and hopefully private attorneys, hopefully we can kind of root out some of the problems that are happening with it. But I encourage people, if they have gotten these loans, one of the biggest problems with them is that it gets into a cycle. That when the 14 days comes up and the loan needs to be paid back, people can't pay them back. They can't pay back the principal, so maybe they just pay the interest, but the loan continues, and it's just a cycle that keeps going and going and going. And pretty
Gangsters
soon,
used to refer to that as paying the vig.
yeah,
And it kept going on and on and on, and you're always paying the vig, and you don't get to pay the loan back. In the meantime, the principal is getting screwed, and the person who loaned the money is getting rich.
yeah. And I had a client who took out a $400 loan. By the time she had come to me with concerns about the loan, she had paid $900 in interest and none of the principal back yet. So they can go on indefinitely, they just keep going on indefinitely. But I would encourage your listeners who are involved in these loans, these internet payday loans particularly, because they are the ones that are most likely are unlicensed or have violated the law in some other ways. I would encourage them to contact me, to contact the Attorney General's office, because you don't have to pay back that loan. If they've violated the law, the loan is void. You don't have to pay back the principal, and you should get your interest back. You should get $1,000 on top of that. So there are remedies, really strong remedies.
And these are basically people without conscience. And
Absolutely.
another thing,
And there's nothing clever about these businesses.
yeah, another thing is abusive debt collectors.
Yeah, I've worked a lot in this area and brought a lot of lawsuits under this on behalf of consumers against debt collectors who violate the federal law, which is called the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. 1977 law, very strong. It dictates how a debt collector can go about collecting a debt from a consumer. So we're talking about consumer debts, not business debts or something, but consumer debts. Those things are used for family, household needs, your credit card bill, those things. And they end up going to debt collectors eventually, and they can be incredibly abusive. They can call your work. They can call your friends and family. They'll do these things. They're illegal, but they do them because they exert a lot of pressure on the people to pay that bill. And they want people to pay the bills.
Mine is not the most uncommon name in the world. It's a pretty common name.
Yeah.
And about a year and a half ago, I picked up the phone one day, and he said, "Is this Alan Miller?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "When are you going to pay back?" I don't remember what it was. I said, "What are you talking about?" And he says, "Look, we can come down, we can take your house, we can do this, that, the other thing." And I said a few things to him that are not printable, but I said, "You got the wrong Alan Miller." And it happens that there's a guy in apparently North St. Paul, or at the time, whose name was Alan L. Miller, not Alan M. Miller. And he said, "Well, are these the first 3 digits of your Social Security number?" I said, "Number one, you're not getting the first 3 digits of my Social Security number, and no, they are not." And he said, "Well, I don't know whether to believe you or not." I said, "I don't really care whether you believe me or not." And ultimately, they tried this several times. This guy apparently was really a deadbeat. And I turned it over to the AG's office, and that was the end of it.
Yeah, I've had a number of cases similar to that, unending phone calls to the wrong person. But I've had cases that have gone the broad spectrum of things. I mean, the law says you can't call a person's place of employment when you know they can't get calls there. And we have, I've had cases where a debt collector has continued to call a person's work. I had one where a debt collector called the receptionist and asked to speak to my client's boss at their workplace. And you can imagine, so the receptionist told my client, said, "God, there's a debt collector calling, wanting to talk to our boss, about you." And he knew what he was doing because that exerts a lot of pressure on my
Right.
client. She was scared out of her mind. Is my boss, am I going to get fired when I have these calls coming into work? So, these third-party calls, calling friends, calling neighbors, calling your workplace.
And these people also have to be licensed
They
in
do.
the state
They
of
do.
Minnesota.
They do.
And many of them are not. And
there-
Lori Swanson has brought some actions.
Yeah, there have been those. They also cannot have felony backgrounds. You can imagine debt collectors have an enormous amount of personal information on the people they're collecting against, and they don't want persons with felony backgrounds having access to that type of information. So there have been problems there, too.
I mean, we had an incident at Fairview Ridges Hospital a year or two ago in which people who were in the emergency room had somebody who were hitting them up if they didn't have sufficient coverage or didn't look that way, made them sign, you're under an anesthetic and you're semi-conscious, and some guy comes along and says, here, you got to sign this also, and you're signing away your life when it's really completely illegal. And I know the AG's office stepped in on that.
Yep. That was another company that I had also brought a lawsuit against that company too, and it's and I actually had a friend who was there and having his second child with his wife, and they pulled the same bit with them where they wanted prepayment, and they had a debt collector for not even existing debt, a prepayment. They're kind of badgering them while she's in the midst of early labor. So debt collectors have no limits. And
in many cases, no conscience.
No conscience. And I think what the law does is set down the parameters and provide some conscience where one doesn't exist otherwise. So, and they can't collect a debt, they can't collect an amount that they're not legally entitled to. You'll see a debt collector, the credit card bill maybe when it went to the debt collector was $2,500, but now they're trying to collect $3,200, and they've added all kinds of interest that they don't have any legal right to add. So I think people have to be very careful.
Companies that turn them over to debt collectors sell them in some cases to the debt collector.
Yeah.
They'll sell them for 50 cents on the dollar, and then whatever the debt collector gets, if it's a $2,500 loan and they sell it for $1,250, if the debt collector can get $3,000 out of that.
Yeah, it's all gravy for the debt collector. Yeah, there's a huge debt buying industry. One of the biggest issues that's going on is if the credit card company sells it to the debt buyer, are their documents sufficient to show that this account was actually transferred? Is the amount correct? Do they actually have evidence of how much they owe? And in many cases, they don't. And so the debt buying industry is big business. And all these industries that people need to understand they have the appearance of possibly being mom and pop shops or small business. This is huge business. Payday lending, debt collection, credit reporting. All of this is big, big business, billion-dollar businesses. So people need to keep that in mind, that they're up against a billion-dollar industry many times when they're doing these things, and they need assistance, and they can get assistance.
Now, there was a recent article in the New York Times about banks hiring independent people in foreclosure cases, and these people were going to homes, ripping the doors off in some cases, and in some cases the people didn't even owe the money.
Yeah.
All of a sudden somebody comes home and they find somebody in their living room and the doors are ripped off, and they said, pay up or now, or we're going to take this away from you.
Yeah, I haven't seen the story exactly what you're talking about, but the stories are very similar to things I've read. I mean, the stories are legendary. I mean, these banks are talking about millions of loans, and they can't keep their documents straight.
And look at the foreclosure crisis that we had, and the fraud that was involved.
I mean, the doc
I don't know if you
fees
had
and
any of
things.
those cases.
I haven't had those cases, but I know the Attorney General's office has worked on those, and people know. I think the amount of document fraud that was going on was incredible, and the fact that we just had a lax system, and these what they call them, ninja loans, no income, no assets, no problem, no job, no problem. Right? I mean, and the fact that they were giving out those loans, and in many cases fraudulently or altering documents to give people larger incomes than they really did and stuff. So it's been a real issue.
And this certainly is something that you're never at a loss for frauds to really fight against.
No, you remember the arcade that's at the whack-a-mole? You get them one way and they pop up other ways. I mean, the number one thing about this, I mean, these are not creative people. This is not a creative industry. It's not the entrepreneurial business spirit that we want, of people coming up with
they're
new
gangsters in many cases.
gangsters.
There are legitimate credit agencies out there, but these people that we're talking about are nothing more than thugs.
Yeah, and they've found, they've found an in, but I think people just need to, there's a hesitation that people have about maybe the initial embarrassment, or they don't want to go to someone because they're having problems with the debt collector, or they don't want to go to someone to get help because they took out a payday loan and maybe there's some shame of it. I mean, I'm here to say, don't, call me. I handle these all the time. I can tell you whether or not you have a case, whether or not you need to pay back that payday loan. Maybe we can get you money back from the payday lender. Maybe we can deal with this debt collector. Maybe we can eliminate debt. I've eliminated for clients tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and the reason why is because they're violating the law, or they don't have the documents to support it. And we've gone after the credit bureaus. You've probably read recently in the New York Times that
was something else I was going to bring up.
Yeah, the credit reporting agencies.
If they have mistakes in your credit report that's damaging to you.
Oh, absolutely. The statistics that over 40% of people, it is even higher, 50% of people have errors on their credit report. And these are credit reports that come from, people will think about Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. Those are kind of the big three credit bureaus in the country. But we're talking about employment background screening companies, tenant screening, if you want to get a
lease.
All these background companies, they're kind of under the umbrella of being credit reporting agencies. But the number of errors, I mean, 50% of people with errors on them. I've seen errors where they've got information, like you were talking about earlier before, the Alan Miller, you go on your credit report and you've got a whole bunch of negative accounts on your credit report.
I hope not.
That belong to, but they belong to Alan Miller down in St. Paul, and they're reporting on yours. And they have these mixed files.
Didn't even spell a name the same way, the first name, but it doesn't bother them.
It doesn't bother them. Doesn't bother them. It's been a huge problem with the industry. I've had a lot of cases against the credit bureaus where these have been problems. I've had people denied credit because of it, unable to get homes because of it, unable to get jobs because of it, or paying increased interest rates because of it.
And the difficulty is getting this information removed.
I think the important thing to do is, and I should tell all your listeners and your viewers this, under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is the federal law that dictates, and really it's about accuracy and privacy of credit reports, that law says that you are entitled to one free credit report from each of the three credit bureaus once a year. And people should take advantage of that. They should go to, the website for it is annualcreditreport.com, annualcreditreport.com, not freecreditreport.com. Freecreditreport.com is not free. Annualcreditreport.com. Go on there, follow the instructions there, and you can get mailed to you, or on the internet, copies of your credit reports, and you can review and just go through and make sure the information is accurate. You can do all these things on your own. Don't get involved with companies that claim they're going to clean up your credit report or restore your credit or whatnot. You don't need to do that. And in many cases, those companies want you to do something that's not truthful. They want you to lie to the credit bureaus and say, well, that account's not mine when it is. So you need to be very careful. You don't need to do any of that. What you need to do is get these credit reports, or if you've recently applied for a job and been denied because find out what company they got your background check from. Get these documents and review them. If there's errors, call me. Deal with, or talk to them.
And especially because, as you say, you can get them free, and you're entitled to it once a year.
Yeah.
Which is a good practice probably to get into.
Oh, absolutely. I do it once a year. I set it up around my birthday. I have a bunch of things that I do on my birthday, and one of them is check that. Just make sure everything's accurate, because ultimately, if I need to get credit for something or anything, having a good credit score is your access to lower rates. And ultimately, we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars over, you know, in the case of a mortgage, if your rate is higher, 30 years, we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars in difference. So
Well, what's
it's well
the
worth it.
difference between a conciliation court and a small claims court? Or is there a
None.
difference? None.
That's the answer. None. I think
Okay.
in Hennepin County or
I mean,
in the
in
state
New
of Minnesota,
York, they used to
concili-
call them small claims courts.
Yeah, I think people
Here
here
it's-
still use the terms generically of small claims court or conciliation court. But conciliation court, I think, is where people can bring. I forget exactly what the dollar amount it needs to be under now. Maybe and I know the legislature just increased it. I'd have to check. Don't quote me on this, but it may be $5,000 to $7,500. It needs to be under that amount to be able to proceed in conciliation court.
And there you can go in, file the form yourself, and be brought in for a trial either in front of a judge or a referee.
Yeah.
And this is not a Judge Judy operation.
No.
This is a real judge or a real referee who will hear your case and adjudicate it.
Yes, and adjudicate it. And I think it's an excellent system for people to resolve disputes without, you don't need to hire an attorney. If it's something you don't want to hire an attorney for, then it can be cost effective that way. The Hennepin County Courts website and the Minnesota Courts website have very good instructions on how to use the conciliation courts in the state of Minnesota. And I always think it's wise for people to learn a little bit about that, and they really work toward resolution in cases down there. They have people meet together before they bring a case forward to see if they can work themselves to resolution. I think oftentimes people, when they sit eye to eye, can usually come to some type of fair resolution of their cases. But no, conciliation court's an excellent venue.
So remind us again your phone number and your website.
My website is minnesotaconsumerrights.com. MN, or spell it out, Minnesota, minnesotaconsumerrights.com. My phone number is 952-933-9655. I answer the phone. You'll get me right away. If you get the message, I'll call you right back. And then email Mark at HeaneyLaw.com or Mark at minnesotaconsumerrights.com. And I'm happy to talk to all your listeners, and I hope they'll take advantage of it. We do free case evaluations and contingency fees, so you don't have to pay me anything.
And that works.
Well,
that
hopefully-
works for us, and it works for the consumer,
Yeah.
and hopefully it works for you too.
Yeah, no, it's great, and I'm really glad you had me on, Alan. It's good to have a.
No, it's good to bring this to the fore every once in a while, because people who saw the program 3 years ago or 2 years ago are not necessarily the same people that are watching today. And of course now it's up on my website, which it wasn't 5 years ago. And you'll get this, you can put it up on your website.
We will.
And people should be aware of their rights. And it's champions like Mark Heaney
Well,
that
we try.
enable them to be aware of their rights. Mark, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks, Alan. Always good to see you.
And